Dr. King's legacy is one of action. It's action motivated by courage and most of all by love. He was a man of great faith, and he believed not just in the ideals of the country, but also the spirit of people to make those ideals a reality. He, more than anyone, knew how hard the task was he had set himself, trying to change the culture of a country that was based on not just slavery, but inequality that had been baked into law. This was a heavy lift, and he had tremendous faith that he could do it. We can look at that today, at the problems we're facing, and see that no matter how insurmountable they seem, you can start with one action, and people will join you. People of goodwill and faith will come together, and they are coming together to continue this legacy. The fight for justice and equality is an ongoing one, and King knew that. He was looking at history, but he was also looking ahead to what the country could be. But he knew that it was going to take effort by every one of us, and it was going to take effort every day to make the ideals of America a reality and to keep them a reality. When you look back at the history of this country, you see tremendous progress, and we have done some wonderful things. But we've also had some tremendous backlash to some of the best things that have ever happened to us, going back centuries. King knew that, and he saw that. Most importantly, he lived it. He lived in the South. He knew that reality. He knew the good people there were often overwhelmed by people who were clinging to history, clinging to the past, clinging, frankly, to a stale, sterile way of life that they thought was benefiting them. It hasn't changed. You know, people are still stuck in that mindset of thinking that things used to be better. They could only get back to a time when things were stable and, in their view, the right people were in charge. But King knew that that was a time that really didn't benefit anyone, that we're all better when everyone advances. He also knew that this was hard. It was going to be hard work, and it's got to be ongoing work. When King talked about the other America, he was talking mostly about the racial divide. But I think we're still in that situation today where we have people who too easily let things divide us. We're divided by class. We're divided economically. We're still divided racially in some very, very deep and fundamental ways in which we see the problems of this country. And King talked about the need to step back from that and to find the commonality that we all share and come together. I was born in Greensboro, and when I was very young, the student sit-in movement started at A&T University there. While I was too young to remember that, you know, my parents remember the students and the civic leaders who were organizing that meeting in the basement of my dad's church and one other church in Greensboro. King came to North Carolina several times in the early 60s to encourage that movement because he knew that young people were the heart of it, they were the spirit of it, and they were going to pick up the legacy that he was laying down and carry it forward. My dad was born in the 1930s in rural North Carolina. And when you think about that time period, you tend to think about, you know, the beauty of eastern North Carolina and sort of the peaceful life. But under the surface, it was a very difficult time for minorities, for blacks in the South. This is before Miranda was even a case, much less rights that are established for all of us. It was before so many of the court cases that established the due process that we take for granted. And so if you were a black person in the 1930s, eastern North Carolina, on the wrong side of the law, the chance was very, very good that you weren't going to get the kind of due process and justice that we all hope to count on today, that we hope is available to everyone today. And so oftentimes for people caught in that situation, the only remedy was just to leave the area, and my grandfather would help them make that change. That's a very important lesson that I learned from both my grandfather and my father, that if people can't count on fundamental fairness within our systems, then they're lost. They feel outside of those structures, and they feel that they have nowhere to turn. It's been very important to me as a prosecutor and as someone who's worked within government to make sure that the government that we have is one that looks at everybody equally and treats everyone with fundamental fairness. We're commemorating the 50th anniversary of the death of Dr. King this year, and those were difficult times. And I remember that event because it was really one of the first events of national significance that impacted me as a child. I was 8 years old, and I remember that day in April. I was driving down the highway with my mother. And had brought us kids to the airport to drop my dad off for a flight. We were riding home, and the radio was playing the usual music, news of the day, and they broke in with an announcement that Dr. King had been shot and had died. And my brothers and I didn't really understand the significance of that at the time. And my mother's reaction was what struck us. It was where she's driving down the highway and she slowed down and she just was so affected by it. And I remember that she pulled over to the side of the road and she put her head down on the steering wheel and she began to cry. And my brothers and I did not know what to do to comfort her. We did not know what had happened. And finally she said to us, you know, Dr. King has been killed, and she explained what that meant. And it was literally as if the very air around us had changed. You know, you have that feeling of something that is of such great importance. When my dad came back from the trip, he told us that the pilot had come on board with an announcement that Dr. King had died. And on the plane, a number of people had begun to cry, but that some people on the plane had actually clapped. And we could not comprehend this. My brothers and I could not comprehend how someone could clap over the death of anyone. And that was the first time that my parents sat down and had to explain to us about racism in America and how everyone did not believe in equality of all people and did not support Dr. King's goals. And it was, as you can imagine, heartrending in so many ways. King's legacy is one of great strength and great commitment. We look at all the wonderful things he was able to accomplish. I think that he inspires so many people today because at the time, no one knew whether it was going to work or not. I mean, the odds against changing the law, changing culture, changing society are always high. So you look at his courage, you look at his perseverance, you look at the deep faith that he brought to this. He was first and foremost a man of deep and fundamental faith. And you see how he inspired ordinary people to come together and with the force of their commitment literally change this country. At the same time, you see people who were not supporters of him at that time, obviously leading up to the events leading up to his death. Change is frightening for people who thought that they had a particular place in society, that they should be theirs forever, and someone comes along and says, no, actually everyone deserves this place at the table. Everyone is part of the beloved community. And you see the lengths that people will go to protect their position, to fight against change. You see the lengths that fear will take people to. People were fundamentally afraid of King's message and what it might mean for losses in their own lives. And I think that's a lesson for today as we look at conflict and how to manage it and how people react to the changes that we see in our country over the years and even now. The way that people will cling to their fears as opposed to opening their hearts up to possibilities is something that can never be discounted. King's death is a reminder of that. But the commitment and the perseverance and strength of people, ordinary people, working people, young people, who literally changed this country is also something that we can't forget, and we can draw strength from it. We see it. We see it now with the young people leading all the movements, Black Lives Matter, Me Too, the Parkland students, the way that they have come together and found their voice and shared it with all of us, and that they're literally shifting the air in this country now around these very important issues is a legacy of King and the civil rights movement. We've made great progress in this country, and I'm optimistic about America. I always am. I look back at all the things we've been able to achieve since the birth of this country, and I still think that our great days are ahead of us, and we can build on those. We can continue to advance. I think that we always, however, have backlash. Whenever we have great progress, you will see the pendulum swing back in many ways. You'll see fear taking over. You'll see that distrust of change taking over. But then, you know, people who are affected by that will realize their own strength and they will push the needle forward again. I think the people that we're seeing now emerge as student leaders, in 50 years we're going to be revering them and looking back at how they have brought this country further along the road to equality. And I'm looking forward to that. I can't wait to see what these young people are doing.